Hello and good afternoon. I am really looking forward to today's conversation as we posted about yesterday. Today we have over to my, I guess it's your left or right. Not sure how it's showing up on the screen, but over here is Tabitha Westbrook. She is a licensed professional therapist. And below we have Joy Forrest. She is a domestic violence expert and advocate, and also the founder and executive director of Call to Peace Ministries. And we wanted to discuss today the Johnny Depp case and go further into this and kind of explore it from their professional expertise and perspective as well. So I'm going to let each of them kind of introduce themselves and why everybody's gathering here. If you don't mind putting in the comments where you're watching from, and if you are following the Johnny Depp case, let us know. We would love to hear your thoughts and questions as we go along. So we look forward to hearing from you as well.
So I might start because I want to introduce Tabitha. So Tabitha and I went to a counseling conference a couple of weekends ago, and she says, I really want to talk about this. She's been really following it. And I'm going to say that I have not been closely following it, but I do have some general ideas about what I would like to say because this is something that happens a lot. We see this in situations that we deal with at Call to Peace Ministries, and I've dealt with for years. But I love the fact that we've got Tabitha on here who can tell us really who's probably stayed up to date with just about everything that's happened. And so we're going to be looking at it from her perspective as a clinical therapist. So go ahead, Tabitha. Maybe just introduce yourself and then go ahead and give us some major ideas that you're having.
Oh, yes, I have thoughts. So my name is Tabitha Westbrook, and I am a licensed marriage and family therapist, licensed clinical mental health counselor, licensed professional counselor, certified clinical trauma professional, LMFT approved supervisor, have a group practice in Wake Forest. We specialize in domestic abuse and coercive control, and also complex trauma. So this is kind of what we do all day, every day. And I am neither a fan of Johnny Depp nor Amber Heard. However, I am constantly fascinated by court cases. I am an expert witness in North Carolina on PTSD. So I have testified, so I'm familiar with some of those processes. I would not call myself an expert in that area at all. I've just been called on to testify in the past. And I have been watching the court proceedings because of how domestic abuse and coercive control has been portrayed. And I've also had a lot of clients who are very interested in the case who are being triggered all over the place by watching some of the coverage. So I thought it was good to talk about since it is in the news literally every single day right now as the trial goes on. We're in week 3, I believe, of the trial. And especially because Johnny Depp is the plaintiff, he gets to go first. And so they've spent 3 weeks really presenting all of their evidence and talking about their perspective. And what a lawyer that I listen to on YouTube refers to civil lawsuits as allegations and shade. And that is exactly what they are. So they're going to say everything that they can to make their side look good. And I think from a PR perspective, we've seen that benefit Johnny Depp over the last several weeks. And Amber Heard's case literally just started. She just was on the stand starting yesterday. So, and they started with an expert witness on her side. And so there's been some, a lot of talk about this going on. And so I thought it was just good for us to all talk about it and how it impacts the people that we see, what we are noticing about it, and that sort of thing.
I would say that what you just said, it's a civil case, meaning that there has already been another case. So basically he's suing her for basically loss of business because they canceled his contract with Pirates of the Caribbean, I guess, after he was convicted. So there was another case where there was actually conviction. I think maybe more than one, because I was reading.
It wasn't convicted. He lost. So it was a civil trial in the UK. Where he also what he's suing over is called defamation. And defamation means that what he's trying to prove is that Amber Heard said stuff about him that was not true and cost him money. So what they're trying to do is prove her to be a liar. And there is a case in the UK that was already settled, and the judge found that he did not meet the burden of proof, and that the burden of proof is actually found that Amber Heard's testimony and case was credible. And I believe, Joy, you'd said you found an article that said it was more likely than not that these things did occur.
Right. Yep, I can read it. It's the judge concluded that the great majority of alleged assaults Depp had been accused of were proven or proved to the civil standard, and that many of the incidences allegedly took place while Depp was under the influence of drugs and alcohol. He is believed to have slapped her across the face, kicked her in the back, and thrown objects at her. So that was already found in a court of law. And um, like I said, we all want to like him. We like him as an actor for sure. But we also find this is a very common thing among the women that we work with who happen to be victims of abuse. The abuser many times is far more charming, far more charismatic, far more effective in testifying in court. And many times victims of abuse are basically basket cases. They're traumatized and they don't do well on the stand. Now, I don't know how she's doing. I haven't watched any of that so far, but it's not unusual to see someone who is abusive come across. And look, I'm not making a judgment. I'm just here saying what we see and how that might apply to what's going on here.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, I've watched her testimony. There are parts of it that seem a little bit rehearsed to me in some ways, but I'm also not in her head, and I haven't been through what she went through in her marriage, right, and relationship. So a lot of people have commented on, oh, well, it seems like she's acting or whatever. I mean, please remember they are both actors and good ones, right? So that didn't, and I guess I see a disparity too on how people have kind of embraced Johnny Depp's testimony, even though I found it incredibly hard to follow. It was like listening to Captain Jack Sparrow trying to have like a conversation. I was like, oh my goodness gracious, like get to the point, bro. And her testimony has been a bit hard to follow, but he didn't get the same vitriol. So I think people are kind of making up their minds a bit. And I always caution people in a trial, watch the whole thing. Wait till all the evidence is presented and then form an opinion based on that, because that's what the jury is having to do. So it is a jury trial, and they're hearing all this evidence as well and coming to conclusions.
Yeah, I think it was interesting. They in this particular article that I was reading, and I can share the link later, that it says that Johnny Depp wined and dined the psychologist that was talking about her borderline personality diagnosis. And I was just watching it as a counselor and just listening. And she would say things that had a personal bias in it. Things like, she becomes the princess. So I did watch that part, and so she thinks she's entitled and she takes on this princess attitude. Well, if she's just talking about borderline personality disorder, that would be inappropriate. So she's actually aiming it towards a female who happens to be the one on, that's sitting over there as the defendant. So it's just been really interesting to watch. I see things wrong with the trial, although I'm not making a judgment. I'm telling you that so many of the things that we see here, we've seen happen. We've seen justice reversed on victims again and again. We've seen users play the victim. It's called Darvo, right? We talked about that before we got on here. So basically, when an abuser is accused of abuse, he denies. If that doesn't work, he attacks. And then the R is to reverse the victim and offender roles. And so that right now, that could be very well what's happening, because he's claiming to be a victim of domestic abuse. Although we've talked about that too. Go ahead.
Yeah. And I will say about the expert witness on his side, she did a great job of testifying in all reality. The wined and dine part, now her job interview for this role is not the way I would have done it had I been asked, which of course they wouldn't ask me, but it was a dinner at his house where she was interviewed. I think she handled the question really well on both direct and cross-examination, to be honest. She said, no, we had an interview over dinner. Yes, drinks were served. So I would not characterize it in the way that the news did of wined and dined, to be honest. And I think she did a very good and professional job of presenting her findings. And the Heard's psychological expert, which also did an examination, she did not present as well. in terms of how she testified, but she made us some really good points that she felt that maybe some of the conclusions that Depp's expert came to might not be accurate because of how the tests were scored. I don't know enough about that personally to know how whether or not that is an accurate statement. I would assume so because she was testifying to it under oath. But I think that, you know, we find this in cases often that you can find experts that will, definitely skew more toward your side. I do think Depp's expert did make a great statement because she was asked about that. Well, aren't you here because you got paid? And that's a common question. And no, actually, she said, my findings are my findings. So I do think she handled it well. And whether or not Amber Heard is borderline, she was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder and histrionic personality disorder by that particular provider. But those don't make you an abuser, right?
Yes.
They make you in need of good therapy, but they don't make you an abuser.
Yeah, I think she handled it well too. She was very convincing. I mean, but there were a couple of times I thought she could have made that a little bit less gender specific. I felt like she was sort of pointing to her. She thinks that, she deserves and so forth. So, yeah. And that's a very good point too about the mental illness. So, that because we know that domestic abuse is not caused by mental illness. And we do know that borderline can be a difficult personality type. And we also know that people who are abused, who have trauma, can react in a way that seems very abusive.
Yeah, definitely. And in this case, it's, there's a lot of, as one of the things that has stood out to me the most is one of the Johnny Depp security people testified. I think it was a few days ago, and maybe it was last week. And one of the things he said was, well, they were arguing and Mr. Depp was giving as good as he got. So he was right in there with it, and they were calling each other names and all of that stuff. And so, neither party is what I would say like clean, right? Like everybody did something. But is it, how is it really portraying domestic abuse and coercive control to the people watching?
Well, and there's a big difference right there. What the difference between coercive control and what we used to call reactive abuse. So basically, it's somebody who's self-defending or somebody who they are reacting. They're doing it out of a reaction versus coercive control, which is more intentional. It's basically keeping somebody under your thumb. And so that's what we really should be looking at here. So, who would be the primary aggressor would be the one who's got most of the control most of the time. And you pointed out something before we became live, we got on. You pointed out that he was almost 20 years her senior and that he basically took advantage of her the very first day. So he kind of just claimed her, which is kind of common for what we see abusive people do. So you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, one of the interesting pieces of testimony when she was talking about how they met, it was on a movie set, and how they kind of started to connect. And she was 23 at the time, and he was in his 40s. And she describes their first kiss on the set as a real kiss, not a movie kiss. And that also he kind of put her down on a bed gently, like it wasn't, ugly, and then also lifted up the back of her bathrobe. And that's fairly consistent with how he testified that they met. And it was a movie that was his baby, right? It was something that was very near and dear to him that he was producing. He's a superstar. Let's be honest, right? Johnny Depp is a handsome gentleman. He's a superstar. Lots of people know who he is. He's been in the industry a long, long time. And she's a young woman who is doing bit parts, essentially, in movies. The power and control dynamic there is in his favor, easily. And again, I'm not trying to vilify either party. I think they both need a lot of counseling and Jesus and no drugs. Like that would be ideal, right? So like I'm not calling him anything. I'm just saying the power and control dynamic was 100% in his favor. All of the houses they lived in were his. He had a private island, right? Like he had a yacht. He, the power was with him ultimately when it came to agency.
Was there something you wanted to say, Lauren? I didn't want to.
Oh, no, she already jumped into it. I was, yeah, I'll let y'all keep going, and then I'll ask questions as we go too. If you have anything you want to add, and I have other questions I want to keep asking too.
Yeah. I just think it's interesting, so we're a faith-based domestic violence ministry. So how does this apply to us? I mean, we're seeing it in the news every single day. Do we jump in and do we automatically believe something that looks so believable? Because, I've known people, family members, oh, I usually side with the woman, but in this case, it's we're seeing something that looks really good and it looks very convincing, and I like what you said, in court you really need to listen to both sides, and you need to look at it through a lens of understanding that power and control dynamic. And so I think that I just wanted to get on it, not that I really wanted to comment so much on this the Johnny Depp case, as much as to say this happens to people a lot. This happens where these people who are abusive, and there's a good chance he was. It seems that those were the findings of a judge, at least one judge. They can come across so much better in court, and a lot of times the victims come across terribly. They can be made to look crazy, and maybe they reacted in a wrong way. I know I sure did when I was going through it years ago. I went in with my pastor. So even in churches, not just in courts, but victims of abuse can be less believable. They can seem less credible and they can seem very unstable, where abusers can be so smooth, calm, cool, collected. And so I think that's kind of the point that I wanted to get across here. And I know, Tabitha, you've got some other things that you feel that you wanted to talk about. So your bullet points of what you're trying to get across here.
I know one of the things that we talked about before we kind of went live was, let's say just for the sake of argument that he never laid a hand on her, right? Was never physical. There is enough evidence already in the court to say that he was emotionally abusive. They were showing some text messages that were admitted into evidence. The other, his side did not object to them, that were really, really ugly and very abusive. He had a habit of calling her, I will say it as this way, a see you next Tuesday. And if you don't know what that means, you can Google it on Urban Dictionary. I'm not going to say it live, but he called her all kinds of names. Yeah, everyone, like everyone that testified said that they fought terribly, and he would say very horrible things to her. So, and not that she didn't say horrible things back. I'm not saying that. I am saying, though, that there's evidence of emotional abuse. And I think that people often forget how damaging that is, right? Abuse is abuse. You don't have to be hit to be abused. And that's a huge misconception that so many people have. And I think a lot of the focus I've seen just in comments are, very much on the, well, did he actually hit her? Well, I mean, that's not the main requirement. So there's, in that. And then the other big thing that I just wanted us all to talk about is how it's affecting people who are watching it, who are survivors, because it's been hard. And I was telling Lauren as we got started that, it's been a hard couple of weeks for my clients, for my survivor clients. They're coming in and they're like, all this news coverage is really triggering me. And then there's like all the TikToks that go with it, for the love. And it's just really hard. So I would tell survivors, like, please take care of yourselves, step away from coverage. You don't have to watch all the TikToks. If your For You page is like really messing you up, don't try to realign it a little bit, maybe hide some things, and you don't have to go there.
Yeah. There's a comment here that they were both very abusive, and it's distressing that we're minimizing her behavior, and we are not doing that.
No, not at all.
So yes, definitely what she's doing is wrong as well. But my thing on this is just to let you know that sometimes women who are victims, because I've said I'm not taking a stand on this because I really haven't watched enough to be educated in making a stand. I'm glad I'm not on the jury, because I wouldn't be all that. Yeah. But yeah, I what I've heard of what she's done has been terrible. And so again, saying that a lot of times people who are traumatized will react in it will look like that they are the primary abusers when maybe they're not. And so all we're saying is that you can't just take it at face value. A lot of times when you're looking at these courts, you're looking at presentations, and what you said at the very beginning there, Tabitha, that this is everybody puts all their dirty garbage and out front. What did you say? You had a little saying that the attorney told you about civil cases.
Lawsuits are allegations and shade. For
Yes.
sure. And
So
and as a therapist, if Amber Heard were my client, she is not. I've never met her. So I'm just saying, if she came in and said, I did all these things, I'm going to go, that's a really terrible idea. Like, let's get you in a good space and also healthy and safe. And no, you can't do those things. Those things are not okay. Right. So I don't think any of us here, and I apologize if it sounded that way, because people can be sensitive to that. I'm not minimizing her behavior. It was bad behavior. She needs a lot of therapy and to not do those things. And they are definitely better off not together. 100%. But it's not, he's, what I'm hearing, and honestly out there in the populace is, oh man, Team Depp. And it's like, dude, I'm team neither of them. I'm team they all need therapy. Like, seriously.
Team therapy.
Yeah, I am team therapy.
All for
Right.
team therapy.
Yeah, but we see you get that comment down there from Judy that she hates the celebrity culture and the worship of death, preventing people from listening objectively, and she feels like that women are unfairly burdened with coming up with perfect proof that they were actually abused, and that's true. And so that's kind of why I was even willing to get on here, is that generally speaking, and so we deal with it. We deal with women who are going through the courts a lot, and we do see that. This is, of course, it's more like a freak show sometimes, or a circus. And again, my thought is it's something to bring up the discussion that the courts don't really get domestic abuse a lot of times, and they don't handle it very well. And so that's what my point here is to say. And we do see abusers claiming to be victims very often. So I feel like we might be seeing some of those dynamics here. It's not to say that anything that either one of them have done that have been pointed out here that we condone that. We do not. So.
Right. And again, it's important to understand the purpose of this trial. And I do agree with what Judy said, that it's setting us back in terms of understanding of domestic abuse and coercive control, without a doubt, because the wrong things are really being focused on. What both sides are trying to prove is whether or not Amber Heard was defamatory toward Johnny Depp. And if so, what would the monetary damages of that be? That is what they're actually trying to prove. All of the salacious stuff is in an effort to prove that. And it's unfortunate, because it does then become about abuse and who was abusing who and what did that look like. And, these are both people with a ton of money and a ton of connections. And what we realistically see is that most cases don't go to court. And there's a difference between illegal and immoral, right? Like in North Carolina, there is not a coercive control law. You can kind of get to it with part of 50B, which is the domestic abuse statute, but we don't have that law. So you can't even go to court over that. It's hard enough to get a domestic violence protective order when somebody is physically harming you.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, there's a lot of awareness and understanding that still needs to happen in this arena.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of my goal for this, is for people to understand what domestic violence truly looks like and the way things play out, generally speaking, in courts. And that a lot of times survivors don't get a fair shake. Now, I think that this woman, she responded terribly many times, or even instigated terribly. But I would imagine, I know that even the diagnosis borderline usually has a lot to do with past trauma. So we've got somebody who's traumatized and living out of her trauma, and he may be too. who knows? But the bottom line is we want to look at who's got the most power, the most control. If we're looking at what domestic violence truly is, then we're looking at this uneven power dynamic. Who had the most power? Then I don't know if you would call them the primary aggressor. What would we call them? But there is a difference between just abuse and being abusive and coercive control, which is where one person has far fewer rights than the other person.
Right.
It's not an equal playing field at all.
No, not at all. And I do think, for people who are watching this and feeling frustrated and getting triggered, and, again, limit your coverage, please. You don't have to watch it. You don't have to engage in that coverage right now. You can later, maybe when you feel, a little more ready for it. If you're like, gosh, this is really overwhelming. There have been times I have been watching the testimony and been like, good gracious, I need to go take a walk, or a shower, or some of all of that. And that's on both sides, and that I think is just something for people to be aware of. And if you are feeling really passionate about this, right? If something about this trial is making you angry, ask yourself why. Maybe there's some work there that you can do, that it's triggering something in you that needs to be worked through, because these are people we don't know. I've never hung out with either one of them. So if I'm feeling really hot and bothered by it, then I need to figure out why. What's going on for me? What am I believing in that moment that maybe I need to address or take before the Lord?
Yeah.
Yes.
So, go ahead, Lauren.
I was going to also ask a couple questions too about that. As you're saying, clients and people are also watching this and feeling like, I never want to report assault, or I never, they feel now very afraid to stand up. What would you say to them as well that are watching and are seeing this and seeing how difficult court is, and are now thinking they don't want to stand up or wouldn't want to report assault or anything? What would you say to that situation?
I would say that you have to pray about it. And I encourage people to report when they can. I think there are reasons that people don't. Some of it is how people are just getting, vilified in the media currently with it. That makes it a little bit scary. I've had lots of clients who have gone to court and it's been a really difficult experience for them. And also, do you have kids in the mix? And you have to decide, is this something that is going to harm my kids? There's just it's not an easy decision. It's not like, yes, this happened, go do this. I think there are lots of times it's the right call, and I encourage it. But also, we have to give victims the choice for using their voice or not. We have to be super careful with that, particularly those of us who are providers, because I don't want to become like that person's abuser or assaulter because I push them in a direction. They have to make that choice themselves. I will support them, I'll encourage them, but it's their choice, and I'm never going to take that away from somebody.
Yes. Thank you for responding.
Yeah. Is there anything else? I see someone saying that we are being very biased, and I have said from the beginning that I don't really have much of an opinion. I'm just saying that what we generally see, and we were hoping that this would bring that to light. But anyway, is there anything else that you would like to say? We know that this is triggering our survivors, because honestly, when you've been through it, then you're going to probably automatically go towards one side or the other. But we understand that both of these folks have done things that are just crazy. I don't know how else to say it.
Absolutely.
And so we're not here to take sides. We're just here to talk about it. We are here to talk about generalities that we see, and we're not applying them to this case necessarily. So
no.
Again, I have not watched enough of it to even form an opinion. I like Jack Sparrow. So
yeah.
Anyway.
And honestly, I am team everybody needs therapy, without a doubt. And I am watching the trial. I'm watching as much of the testimony as I can. And I don't have a conclusion because it's not over. There's still at least another 2.5 weeks of trial. So, there isn't a conclusion yet, and it's okay. Again, I think when we mentioned that there had been an adjudication in the case in the UK, we said what they found, and that was it. And truthfully, I mean, I would love it if nobody, it would be so awesome if none of us had a job, because this wasn't a problem, because it wasn't in the news, it wasn't misconstrued, it wasn't triggering people, because it didn't happen anymore.
Yeah.
And I will straight up, I work with perpetrators, Joy, I know you have as well. And our goal is for them to be healthy. Like, no matter who's perpetrating it, our goal is for healing and health on all sides.
Yeah. And clearly these folks, they're just so far from that. So it's very sad to watch. It really is. And maybe that's part of the reason I don't want to watch it. I'm just, it's something that we deal with daily. And so we pray for them, because it's just a big fat mess. It really is. And it's so sad when it's being played out, in the public eye. And I think that's one of the things that bothers me so much, that they have that camera in there. So it's actually being played out in the public opinion polls. And so people are taking sides and not even waiting for all the evidence to come out on the other side. So that's very sad as well.
Absolutely. And I think there's beauty in cameras in courtrooms, honestly, because it does give us visibility to the process. But I think we all have to understand it's a process. And I think that's where it gets a little bit hard for folks, because again, we've only really fully heard one side of the story. The other side is currently being presented. And I would have to say, and I said this earlier, I don't think Amber Heard's forensic psychologist did a good job testifying at all. I watched that, and I actually was messaging a friend of mine who is an expert and who does that for a living. She is a forensic evaluator, and I was like, oh my goodness, did you see that testimony? Because it wasn't well presented at all, and it certainly did not come across. I don't think it helped Amber Heard, I will tell you that. And so that's unfortunate. I think she did a great job in some ways of explaining domestic abuse and coercive control. It's clear she knows her stuff. There was a little bit of dated information just in terms of the cycle of abuse, which I know most of us kind of are like, that's not quite linear, right? Like that's just a little bit of old news. But the way that she presented her data wasn't maybe how I would have done it. And I don't think it was as helpful as it could have been. So, there's that. Again, each side gets to put their best game forward, and then the judge and jury are going to decide what happens with it.
Yep.
Yes. And then the last thought is too, something we were talking about before we come here that I wanted to bring to light too, is like we can't label people like, oh, she's borderline this, so therefore she lies, or therefore she abuses. Right. And that also goes badly for victims in court when you start labeling people as bipolar, or they're this, so therefore they abuse, because then you're discriminating against mental disorders. And so we always have to realize that abuse that we do is always a choice, no matter what the diagnosis is. Yes, it may be challenging for them in certain areas of their lives or their personality, but it's always a choice, no matter what. It's not on any diagnosis that makes somebody act and behave the way they do.
No, definitely not. And honestly, it sometimes is helpful for clients, and I'll just go with the client, not even this case, like just the normal client that we see, right? Where it can be helpful to them to understand themselves if there's a diagnosis. But the diagnosis doesn't mean that you act that way all the time, even, right? It means that maybe you have a way, particularly with personality disorders, of seeing the world. Very often there's a traumatic element to them. You came by it honest, right? Like, because you experienced trauma in your life. There are many, many, many people, and I just really want to say this because borderline personality disorder is the one that gets vilified more than anything else. Any other personality besides narcissistic personality disorder gets vilified more than anything else. And it doesn't mean that people can't function well. In fact, dialectical behavioral therapy is amazing for helping folks who are, diagnosed with borderline personality disorder to really function super well. They're amazing things, and healing is always possible. And we serve an amazing God who can heal any broken thing, no matter what it is, no matter what diagnosis you might have gotten at some point. And I think that's really important to keep in mind, because my fear, especially with how this is being portrayed in the media, again, I don't care who is found what on this. I don't know either of them, but the folks who are diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, I fear that they're going to be unnecessarily vilified by people around them, and that's not helpful at all. And it doesn't mean that they can't be amazing, wonderful, functioning humans who are healthy, right? They just need to have a couple extra skills around it.
Yes.
Yep, and we could pray that for them. They both need a lot of skills, don't they?
They do.
Yeah. Anyway, it's very sad. You know, some of the people are commenting. It is very sad, and it's disturbing, Debbie. Yeah, for sure. But again, we want to just encourage those of you who are watching who may be triggered by it. I totally agree. Turn it off. You don't have to watch it. There are just so many things in the news. I honestly, after the last election or before the last election, stopped watching the news pretty much all the time. And I figure if something's really important, it'll be on social media somewhere. Somebody will tell me. So I'm not as informed as I used to be, and I have a lot more peace in my life because honestly, you could just social media in and of itself. I spend very little time here anymore because it just it's a peace stealer, and so we want you guys to have peace. And but we did want to talk to you a little bit about the dynamics and the way it sometimes plays out. We have seen it play out this way many times in courts, and when there was just legitimate, and even maybe the victim wasn't responding as terribly as Heard is, there is, she's clearly, it got a whole different level. So and we're not saying that she's this innocent victim. We're saying that she has definitely done a lot of things wrong, and we don't know that, how it's the dynamic of it all. We've just heard incidences. We have not heard patterns, and that's what we look for in domestic abuse. We're looking for patterns of power and control that have gone on over time, and so you're not getting that with these incident reports. So I totally think that this is something that could really suck us in, and we could get really interested in that, and then we would end up feeling very strongly about one side or the other, and been being very disappointed at the end either way. So
right, exactly.
So somebody says, Carrie, stop watching the news and reading the newspaper when my son went to Iraq. Yeah, well, I get it. And so, yes, they definitely need deliverance, and we can certainly pray that for them. And also just continually keep in mind the women, the families that we serve through Call to Peace Ministries, who a lot of times are going through these kinds of situations in court, and it's not fair. And it's because of the way can present. I would love to see a legal system where, there was really equity, and it wasn't that the person who had the most money and the best lawyer won. So this is what it brings to mind for me, having dealt with so many women who've gone through the courts, and the courts just have not always been fair. They've not always understood domestic abuse, and they will go with whoever looks best. It's like in politics. Yeah.
Right. So. And we do want to keep in mind, right, that regardless of the outcome of this case, let's say that, it is found that Amber Heard defamed Johnny Depp. Let's say that that's what the jury decides. My biggest fear, and a good reason for us to talk about this as well, is that's not what normally happens, right? Let's say she's just a rampant abuser and a terrible human being. That's not usually what we see. Usually the abuser is the abuser, and the victim is not doing anything like what she's alleged to have done. So, I think that's another thing to keep in mind. This does not represent all cases of domestic abuse at all. Like, in fact, we see them look a lot different very often.
Yeah.
And I think that's just really important to keep in mind. And my fear is that people are going to be like, oh, well, women lie, and, or any victim, whether they're male or female, lies. And that just isn't what the research shows. That isn't what our experience shows. That typically victims aren't lying to you about it. They're truthful. And, that's something to keep in mind as you watch this, regardless of the outcome or how you feel about either party.
Yeah. And it's a messy, these situations can be so messy. And I've had it where,
Mm-hmm.
we're people that we're trying to help seem to turn on us and seemed very abusive. And I find it's
Mm-hmm.
people who have not healed who end up becoming more like perpetrators. They become angry and they allow the anger to keep on, leading them down this path. They choose to walk that road instead of walking towards healing, because healing's hard. It's not easy work.
Yeah, it is.
Very hard.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, there's a comment that all of this person's abusers were abused in their childhood, including the men. And that is a true statement. I think, Joy, you and I would definitely verify that, having worked with folks who are abusive, that absolutely we see trauma. And that's one of the things that we treat when we're working with somebody who's abusive. We
Yeah.
are trying to help them heal their trauma.
But here's the thing too, just like we said at the beginning, the trauma doesn't necessarily personality disorders, mental health issues don't cause domestic abuse. It's still a choice. And so we see that, because we were talking about it before we turned on the video here, that I have a guy on my staff who grew up with domestic abuse. So according to, if childhood trauma did it, then he would be abusive. But here he is helping victims, helping perpetrators. He's such a great helper, because he chose to do his work, to work through his stuff and to get educated and move forward. And so it really all boils down to choice in the long run. Yes, it's a whole lot harder to overcome these things when you've been through trauma, when you have mental health issues, but it's not impossible.
Right. Absolutely. And I we do have a question about trauma mimics some of those personality disorders too. And yes, they can. Absolutely. I think that's why you do need a good assessment, if you can get one, so you can figure out what's going on. But again, labels are like, let's resolve the trauma and heal the trauma, and then maybe we don't need a label also.
Yes. And thank you for sharing that, Joy, about the trauma does not cause abuse, because a lot of times abusers can use that to get sympathy from their people they're abusing, to be like, I was abused and only you can help me heal. And it's very important to realize we can rescue, save, redeem, restore anybody. That is their work, and them alone have to go through therapy and deal with that, because you will not help heal them of their childhood trauma if they're not willing to walk through it themselves and deal with it. It doesn't make you abusive.
For sure.
So yes, I'm glad you said that, because I know a lot of times it's easy for women to get caught up in, I'm going to rescue them. No, you won't.
And Kayla's saying very
true. I'm sorry.
So healing is hard. Hurt people. Yes, but not all hurt people. I'm a hurt person who is helping people. So again, it's a choice as to whether or not you're going to be willing to do that work. Yeah. And so, the ones who don't ever heal, those hurt people will turn around and hurt others. But it's being able to get past that victim. Even like I had a victim mentality for a while. I felt like the world owed me and I was pretty angry. So I had to work past all that. And so we definitely would love, that's what we're all about here at Called to Peace Ministries, is trying to help people find that healing, so that this kind of this is where we see a cycle. It's like an intergenerational cycle. There's not an abuse cycle so much where there's a honeymoon phase and all that, but there is this intergenerational cycle that's passed down from through families, family lines. And so, that's my goal in my own family, is that this would be broken in my grandchildren's generation. My kids lived through it, but yes, it's definitely something we can overcome if we're willing to do that work.
Yes.
Absolutely.
There is no pit where he's not deeper still. I love that quote. There is nobody that's too far gone. God is still in the business of redemption. He can still redeem Johnny Depp and Amber Heard. There's still redemption for them, even though sometimes we go through hard things or courts and it feels like everything's lost, but there's still redemption for them even in this. And God can still use this in their lives to redeem and draw them to himself. And so as you're out praying for them, there's still hope for them as well.
Yep. Amen. Well, that seems like a good place to end it. What do you think?
Agreed. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Well, thank you guys for joining us today.
Yeah.
Thank you for doing this. And, again, if you have questions about domestic abuse and coercive control, ask them. Like, we'll respond. If you're like, gosh, what's going on? And if you need help, above all else, please get help. Call to Peace Ministries is amazing. If you don't know them and this is your first time getting to know them, I encourage you to get to know them. I've been a partner with you guys for a long while now, and have seen the good work that is done often. So connect with them. You can get an advocate, you can get information, you can get training. If your church needs some training and support, they can also help you with that. If you need therapy, we know good therapists. So not only does my team do this, but we know lots of other folks. If you are not in North Carolina, Texas, South Dakota, or Florida, where someone on my staff can see you, or Wisconsin or Virginia, because that's where we're all licensed, then we know people all over the place, and then we can work to get you connected. So if you're listening to this and like, holy Toledo, man, I need some help, please get yourself some help. You don't have to stay in that place at all.
Yeah, we have healing support groups, by the way. That's the only thing I think you forgot, but hey, you did great.
Oh, sorry.
And then Ingrid, one quick thing. Yes, that healing is vital, and verbal abuse is still abuse. Absolutely. And we
Absolutely.
Totally believe that. And even the power and control wheel. And when we talk about coercive control, it's talking about verbal abuse, emotional abuse, and all those things. So bless you too, guys. Thank you for joining us. And we hope to see you next time around. Actually, Lauren and I'll be back here tomorrow at noon with Eileen Scipione, who is actually a biblical counselor who came to our retreat last month and who has had a change of heart or change of viewpoint, and she's really getting very interested in learning more about trauma and domestic abuse, and I really love to hear what she's got to say about several things that through actually the lens of scripture. So join us tomorrow at noon if you have a chance to do that.
Yes.
Right. Thank you, guys.
See y'all, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.